Hi, hello. I want to talk about enemy and boss management in Salmon Run. It's kind of overwhelming at first, and knowing what to do, where to be, and what to focus on is something that generally improves with time and practice. However, I'm going to discuss ways to help you with this. This video won't be as rigidly formatted as my other videos. It'll be more free flow as I discuss tactics and other bits of information that I've learned from playing this game. Like all my other videos, I'm speaking from a place of personal knowledge and experience. Nothing I say is official or unchangeable, it's purely opinion. Any explanation of terms will be in the description if I don't explain them in the video, and this video is specifically aimed at freelance and not overfishing. However, a lot of this advice will translate over to squad games and help you improve at the game if you're newer or less experienced. It just won't go into a min-maxing at an absolute high end. I'm not the most experienced person to discuss overfishing, but I'll leave some outward links in the description if you'd like more depth or further help. I want to start this video by talking about the different types of enemies in this game and the different ways they work. As you know, enemies function and attack differently, and so you need to react differently. Leaving certain bosses alive for any length of time will cause a deficit to you and your team in one of three areas: space and movement, turf, and then safety. Certain enemies and bosses may appear in multiple categories and threaten you in multiple ways, not just one. The first category are bosses that restrict space and or movement. These are steel eels, slamming lids, scrappers, flipper floppers, steelheads, and all lessers. The second category are bosses that cause you to lose turf. Steelheads, fish sticks, drizzlers, flyfish, flipper floppers, and all lessers. And the third category are bosses that threaten your safety and subsequently cause you to become displaced. These are flyfish, stingers, big shot rings, moors, drizzlers, steel eels, and all lessers. Something that you may immediately notice here is that all lesser salmonids contribute to all three threats here. They restrict your movement by blocking corridors or protecting bosses. They cover the map in green ink, and specifically annoying is that they ink walls as they pass through. And finally, they cause you to move either for safety or to manage them. I don't think any boss threatens you the way lessers do, and I specifically think this is the reason why Salmon Run is harder in Splatoon 3 than in Splatoon 2. If you've never played Salmon Run in Splatoon 2, you won't remember how silly and almost inconsequential lessers were. You could work around them quite easily, and they were often quite slow to react. This isn't the case in Splatoon 3, and the changes made to them have made the game trickier. You are forced to deal with them, and ignoring them or not taking note of their influence is a huge blockade to improving at the game. Lessers should always be focused in freelance. I think the way I die the most is because of them, either from combination hits or from stack damage that is just finished off by a pound slap. I'm not going to talk about staying alive in this video. I have other videos discussing that if you're interested, but you will reduce the chances of accidental deaths if you recognise where lessers are coming from and how you need to manage them. I think in freelance, lessers are often ignored because you don't get those shiny golden eggs and you don't get any badges for them. You just get power eggs, which I think for casual or less experienced players don't really mean anything. But let me let you in on a secret. If I see low power eggs, I just want you to know that I'm judging you. No, I'm only slightly joking, but I want you to start noticing when your power eggs are lower. This often means you're not helping with lessers. If over the course of 3 waves your power eggs are lower compared to your teammates, then think about what you need to incorporate lesser management into your game plan. Because even just ignoring flex and stats, leaving lessers alive restricts your space, they restrict your turf and causes you to become displaced. Killing them helps to remove these risks. So let's talk about the first category. Bosses that restrict your space and movement are what I believe are critically dangerous and should rarely be lured in multiple numbers. I often choose to kill these bosses earlier and only leave them alive if I'm in a lobby that I know can comfortably manage the different spawns. If I'm in wave 1 of a freelance game, I don't hesitate to defeat these bosses quickly, and I recommend you start doing the same, especially on maps that have restricted space around the basket, such as Marinas Bay, Spawning Grounds, Bone Rattle Arena, and Salmon and Smoke Yard. Steel eels are the most obvious example here. If you have 3 of them all descending to you at basket and all following different players, how do you expect to move? It's something so simple to think about, but you literally cannot move, and when that happens, it's often GG's. Whilst ills are the most egregious example of this, slamming lids are also extremely problematic if left alive in multiple numbers for too long due to the lessers that spawn. They often cause restriction in your ability to pass through thinner corridors and sometimes end with you being pushed into the water. Yeah, they're great at killing other bosses, and they can be left alive to do this, but I would be cautious with this, especially if you don't have much room to move around them. Maps like Jammin' Salmon Junction, Gone Fish and Hydro Plant, Salmonid Smokeyard, these maps allow you to use the lids quite easily and don't run the risk of restricted space too heavily, depending on which tide you're on. I'm looking at you, low tide Gone Fishing. However, maps like Bay show how problematic they can become when they're left alive for too long. One of the biggest threats you face when playing Salmon Run is your inability to move, whether this is to get to further spawns or whether this is to retreat. These space and movement restrictive bosses will impact your game negatively more than any other boss type, as not being able to move is simply waiting for death. You can't stay idle in Salmon Run, and not being able to clear space around you quick enough causes you to wipe. In addition, you'll likely notice your freelance teammates will often try to hug you or stand in front of you, and I'd recommend staying far away from players like this. To your detriment, they likely won't see why all of you standing together in one area is simply not a good idea. Again, this is why bosses that limit your space are bad. Eventually, they'll all converge on one area and you won't be able to move. When your teammate that keeps wanting to hold your hand inevitably dies in front of you, those still ills and scrappers that were aggro to them will immediately target you, and how are you going to move away quick enough? Proactivity is the best form of management for these bosses, and I'd encourage you to ignore teammates who try to lure 3 still ills to the basket and aim to kill all 3 of these as soon as possible. Any player that wants to lure 3 ills to basket is not a player that knows what they're doing. Sorry if you disagree or if I'm calling you out, I just think in freelance you're better off managing the situation earlier than watching your teammates who don't understand aggro or the way bosses move all scramble around 3 ills instead of shooting at the tail of the ones that aren't targeting them. If I can, I will de-aggro ills off of me so I can kill them safely. I have just had so many experiences of hoping my teammates will kill the ill that is targeting me just to see all 3 of them killing one fish stick instead. Choosing to rely on teammates you don't know is a risk and is something you always need to factor in, and that means killing these bosses earlier where possible. Scrappers, flipper floppers and steelheads are all bosses that restrict space in less obvious or less threatening ways when compared to the previously mentioned. One scrapper on its own is not really an issue, but when you have 3 of them, all stunned in different directions, and you have a silly little roller that bounces off everything, they become quite dangerous quite quickly. It's also possible to find them difficult to manage if you're a splatling or a dually, as these weapons are interrupted by the way scrappers move. They're harmless if they're on their own or you have a weapon that doesn't struggle, but bear in mind your teammates who may not have as much ease. Flipper floppers and steelheads restrict space by their intermittent attack cycles. If unable to move around these or paint yourself to safety, these bosses remove huge chunks of the map for you to move through and start to cause serious issues if left alive for too long. Again, individually they'll not pose too much of a threat, but in clusters of 3, they'll threaten your ability to move quite drastically. Again, some of this comes down to what weapon you have, what tide you're on, and whether you can aggro bosses either onto you or off of you. What I mean by this is that standing on grates forces flipper floppers to target someone else, and steelheads can be aggroed from above and be led to a better position on certain maps. Lining these bosses up in better positions for your teammates that may have better weapons for them is a small way to manipulate these bosses. I wouldn't focus too hard on doing this though. If you're worried about 3 steelheads or 3 flipper floppers, then aim to kill them ASAP. One of the benefits of killing these bosses is that they create turf, and hey, talking about that, the second category I want to talk about are bosses that cause you to lose turf. These are bosses that need swift management. Losing turf often means you lose movement, which means you lose space. So these bosses and the reasons why you want them gone is more or less similar to the first group that I've just discussed. Having turf to move through is one thing. However, turf also provides healing and ink recovery, which goes without saying how important these actions are. I want you to start thinking about how often you submerge yourself in your own ink throughout a game. The way this can be measured is through the amount of deaths you have. It is likely, although not conclusive, that you'll die more often if you don't heal off damage through submerging yourself, or you just run out of ink and you can't protect yourself. So whilst turf is good for movement, it also plays a vital role in keeping you safe and in control. Again, Salmon Run doesn't reward players for turfing. There are no stats like Turf War that show you how much you painted, and I desperately wish this is implemented for future Salmon Run games, as I think it will be the switch that ignites the light bulb in a lot of players' minds. Regardless of stats or rewards, aiming to be on top of turf is extremely important and something to be consistently assessing throughout a wave, not just during the 10-second pre-wave countdown. I'm sure a lot of you get annoyed at players standing still in between waves, but you're probably also a player that neglects to paint waves throughout a wave yourself, so I kind of don't care if a player is idle during the countdown. I just hope that those with painty weapons spend some ink painting common routes such as walls, basket areas and platforms. You will never be punished for painting an extra wall, let me just make that clear. It may save you, or you might be last alive wishing you had painted a wall to help you survive. Before I speak about the bosses specifically, a quick message about why turf is so important for keeping you alive. You heal quicker when submerged in ink, so being able to frequently heal off damage can be the difference in surviving a hit from a chum or dying to it. Sometimes the difference is 1 HP, but that 1 HP will keep you alive and productive instead of dead, so start recognizing when you have time to paint a few areas. The most obvious and I think the most deadly turf restrictive enemy are fish sticks on certain maps. They're inconsequential in certain ways. They are very low damaging enemies that are often a bit out of the way and don't threaten your space immediately. But after 1 or 2 cycles alive, they will completely remove turf around their radius, and this makes you so much more likely to get stuck and take further damage from other enemies like drizzlers and lessers. None of these enemies hit you hard, but the way they eat up the turf around you is very dangerous, and combined, these enemies will kill you very quickly. Fish sticks leave a very small area of turf untouched by them close to the stick itself, and you can use this to move or help yourself, but I would avoid relying on this strat completely and aim to get rid of sticks quite quickly. Certain maps have worse stick positions, and on some maps you could ignore them if the tide allows it, but I will say that universally for all high tides you shouldn't allow even 1 of these to live, let alone 2 or 3 of them. They should be broken before they land if you can do this with the comp you have, but you can also let all 3 of them land, and after that no further sticks will spawn, so there is a way to prevent more spawning with minimal risk. If you have a weapon that isn't great at defeating them, you should either paint the stick for your teammates or use specials if 3 of them are alive at any one time. Trust me when I say that these bosses are deadly when left alive. Drizzlers and flyfish take away turf intermittently and become problematic when the field is overrun with enemies that are not well controlled. These bosses by themselves are not exactly super dangerous, they're more annoying than anything else. They're quite easy to dodge and fairly easy to recognise when they're coming for you, but when left alive for lengths of time or multiple are on the field, your turf and subsequently your ability to move becomes limited. Drizzler torpedoes should be shot down wherever possible. They have a funny hitbox and I'm not entirely sure of the damage they cause, but they can be used to paint the map and destroy other enemies. Of course, when shot back they destroy the drizzler itself, so I suspect they're capable of doing at least 900 damage, but potentially more. Either way, shooting them down is a really useful habit to pick up, and I find them especially handy at creating small explosions of turf. If you can't defeat the drizzler, you should shoot the torpedoes anyway, as that is their attack rendered ineffective. The drizzler rain damages you quite quickly when you're trapped in it, and combined with a hit from a lesser or an indirect hit from a flyfish missile, you're likely to die quite quickly. They also heavily paint the map, which causes movement and health and ink recovery to be slow or impossible. Drizzlers are a passive boss that will slowly combine damage with other enemies to make life extremely difficult for you. If there are 3 of them active, you'll really need to prioritise getting rid of them. The same goes for flyfish. They quickly cover the field in enemy turf and make it quite tricky to manoeuvre around. When combined with drizzlers and flipper floppers, you're going to have a very difficult time trying to find ink to remain safe in, especially if you're a charging weapon or something slower. Flipper floppers are again inconsequential when only 1 of them is on the map, but if you're on a high tide and there are 3 of them and you have, say, a blaster, you're going to struggle and find it difficult to move and therefore stay alive. Prioritise taking these out, or at least painting the circles so that they take damage and render themselves easier to kill on their next attack cycle. The third category I want to talk about are bosses that threaten your safety and cause displacement. They're in a bit of a weird spot compared to the other 2 categories of bosses. You can ignore them and find ways to work around their attack cycles if you know how to, but ignoring them for too long or ignoring clusters of them will cause a terribly quick snowball that may be really hard to recover from. The key, in my opinion, is to recognise what is needed in the moment you're in. These bosses are generally speaking either weak or have intermittent attack cycles that can be easy to to dodge, so they don't pose an immediate threat the way I find the other types of bosses do. However, I can certainly say that being chased by 3 stingers on opposite ends of the map is not something you want to happen, and allowing this to happen for any length of time will inevitably end in failure. So, figure out the current objective. Is it early on in the wave and there's only one fly fish in the distance, but lureable bosses all coming towards the basket? Depending on what your teammates are doing, it may be possible to ignore one fly fish. The same goes for one stinger or one big shot. Or is it early on and there are no other bosses around? If that's the case, then you'll need to go for the statics, as they will be your only way to generate eggs. Standing at the basket here and waiting to see if lureable bosses come in isn't something I genuinely recommend. Moving forward and being aggressive with killing is usually the best way to play. This is even more important if still ills are coming in, as these cause you to move and limit where you can go. They may block static spawns entirely or prevent you from reaching the other side of the map. We've already spoken about ills, but they have to go as soon as possible, as they are a continuously high threat that will disrupt your safety and force you to move either into an unsafe position or completely block whatever you're firing at. For the rest of these bosses in the group though, it is possible to work around them or just let them attack for a cycle or two before killing them, if the wave allows. The trick is to not let 3 of these be alive at any one point. One big shot is almost laughably easy to ignore, but 3 of them? It's kind of hell, and I guarantee that it will make basket unreachable. The same goes for fly fish and stingers. Especially if they're all firing off at slightly different times, you'll never have a moment of downtime as they continually aim at you whilst you're forced to stop what you're doing and move. Allowing these displacement bosses to stack up in bigger numbers mean that you'll likely never have a moment to replenish ink or health in a safe spot, causing the likelihood of dying to become greater. With the exception of Moors, there are moments when specials need to be deployed, and sooner rather than later. Allowing clusters of displacement bosses to remain alive is a death sentence, and trying to ignore them because you may not have the best weapon or it's only wave 1 means you're signing off on your own failure. How are you going to safely kill other enemies or run eggs if you're constantly harassed by missiles, rain or stingers? As mentioned, there are ways of mitigating the damage or the effect that these bosses have on you. The stinger matches your speed, so if you walk slower, the stinger follows you slowly. Doing this may allow you to move to a place of safety without risking your health. Flyfish missiles can be tanked if there are platforms above you, most likely the grates. Big shot rings can be ignored if you're on a higher platform, depending on the map and the tide. Moors are relatively easy to ignore for a few cycles, and the turf they leave behind is minimal. It's also possible to de-aggro these off of you or give them to your teammates if you have a weapon not suitable to spamming bombs. Drizzler rain and still ills can't be avoided as easily, and that's why they should be focused with more priority than the others that I've just mentioned. It's possible to work around these, but I'd recommend not even trying to. It's safer to kill them quicker. The other major issue with these bosses is that when they spawn in the last 30 seconds of the wave, you'll notice players chase them down immediately without thinking of anything else that may be happening, most notably quota. I've watched players leave basket to kill one big shot, but the quota isn't even half met with less than 30 seconds left. As mentioned before, one of these is very easy to ignore, so actively choosing to go down to a big shot instead of focusing on the more important objective is just not the best play. Ideally, you'd have met quota by this point and have more freedom to decide what to do, but until quota is met, you need to prioritize it, even at the expense of other bosses on the field. An example of this is that stingers target the furthest player away from it. You can use this to take that aggro and move it from basket to allow your teammates some more safety, or you can push forward to cause the stinger to focus on someone else and thus afford you that safety. Though I think displacement enemies are one of the easier bosses to manage, I also think they present conundrums that make them the hardest group to manage, as you're forced to adapt immediately and switch objectives. You're also forced to confront your safety, and you're forced to decide very quickly what you should do. Should I ignore it or kill it? You will make the wrong decision. It's impossible not to. Your friends will all be alive at the basket, and you'll run to take a stinger and a flyfish and turn around to realize you're the last alive. This is what makes the game challenging, and you're left asking yourself, should I have left my teammates at the basket there? Or did you make the right play, but your teammates just didn't help themselves? Sometimes you'll get more out of the game in terms of results when you make the lives of your teammates easier. Displacement bosses force you to confront these decisions. I don't have a right or wrong answer here, but I will say that you'll recognize more and more the correct answers the more you play. You'll start to recognize if you need to go out and take care of displacement bosses immediately with specials, or whether you can simply manipulate their attacks to prioritize staying at the basket. In addition, you'll also start noticing when your teammates want to chase down every big shot without fear of losing a wave, and you'll find ways to work around this. The main advice I can give with these bosses is to keep them alive at your own risk. You knowing how to dodge them is fine, but if your teammates don't, then you'll be last alive very quickly and find it impossible to dodge them. Focus quota when you need to, but don't ignore displacement bosses or enemies just because you can run away from them. I hope this video gives you an insight into how my brain works when playing Salmon Run. That's kind of the point of this video, a look into how I process the game and weigh up decisions. The way I describe bosses and make choices is all independent of anybody else. I've learnt from experience and practice, so you may think differently or have a different style of playing with certain bosses. And that's great. I love how Salmon Run encourages different strats, and when I watch other players, I'm always curious about their decision making or style of play. All this to say, you may disagree with me, which is fine, but if you decide to leave a comment, then consider that first before telling me how your way of playing is better. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this and can take something away from it. I'll see you guys soon.